I think most of you know our two presenters today, but we have Jill Martin in the Education Department, and then Patti Paulson, kind of the Education Department / Science. Say exactly what, but appreciate both of them being here, and they're going to be talking about connections between active learning and inquiry-based learning. And we'll plan on going to about 11, so if you need to leave at 11, feel free to get up and make your way out. If we carry on after that, that's a possibility too, and stay if you'd like to as well. But 11 o'clock we'll finish up that. So we'll probably have a few more people straggling in here, hopefully. But thanks for coming.
I'm Jill. I think I know all of you. It's good to see you and Jill too. My focus was active learning, and I kind of looked at the big picture of active learning, and then I had to stop and think, what drives me with active learning? And I think what drives me is the work of John Dewey in the progressive philosophy and how to engage your learners and have them construct the information instead of just passively absorbing the information. And I try to use active learning regardless of the type of student I have, undergrad or graduate, and the size of the class that I have. And since you and Joe have both been in my classes, you can hold me accountable. Do I indeed do this on a somewhat regular basis? What I believe about active learning is simply get the students involved with the content. What have they read? How can they engage with what they've read? How can they make meaning out of what they've read? And then apply it to the skill set that we're trying to help them develop. Because I teach all education students, and they're all future teachers, and they need to be able to engage their learners. So I use active learning both as a teaching tool, but also a way to model for them what they can use when they're working with their students. Do you all know active learning? Do I need to? I'm feeling since you're all either close to education faculty or psychology students, that you pretty much have a handle on active learning. Is that a safe assumption? So instead of telling you what it is, why don't I ask if you have questions about it, or how you can facilitate it with your learners, your future learners, how it varies when you have a small class to when you have a large class, when you have freshmen to when you have graduate students. Because I use some of these exact same strategies with the undergrad students as I do with my graduate students. So I'll entertain questions if you have questions or examples of how you've used it, if there are.
I would just make a comment that you maybe can respond to. I was recently tenured, and in that process was questioned about how I could use John Dewey as that because he's a humanist.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting it was to me as well.
And so because he comes from a humanist philosophy and bent, that we throw out all of his work because of that single factor.
That was kind of my response, but it was interesting that it was I was challenged on that.
Well, I'm heavily influenced by John Dewey.
I am too.
Heavily influenced, because he talks about the brain and how learners learn, and I don't know that that's a humanist point of view more than a psychological point of view or a scientific point of view. The brain functions in certain ways and needs certain, pardon my layperson's terminology, but it needs certain things. It needs certain activities to jumpstart the chemical and the electrical reactions in the brain so that students begin to work. So I guess I would focus more on the psychology of it.
And I think, in early childhood, it's just that constructivist learning is what we
Absolutely.
have to do. It's interesting that we believe we continue to do it into college. I mean, I believe in it, but not many people do beyond young ages.
Well, I think as adults, we are always active in our lives, and I think an important part of active learning is that we view our students as producers instead of consumers. And you and I as adults, we're producing all the time, and so we need to teach our students that true learning and true understanding and the way to make a difference is to produce something, not just to consume it or to have that knowledge in our head. And so that goes beyond John Dewey, doesn't it? I think it's a real-world application. It's how we function. It's how we contribute by producing. So You know, I probably have my interview coming up in a month and a half, so we'll see if I'm asked that same question. Any other comments or questions? Joe?
I have a question. Do you think that an active learning approach, like, do you have to differentiate between introverted and extroverted students at all? And like students who are like hands-on and students who are a little more recoiled? Or is active learning, like, does that really apply equally to both of them?
I think it applies equally to both of them. I think active learning, particularly when it's in a small group, brings the introverts out. Introverts are very knowledgeable, but just need to internalize more than externalize the information and how they're learning. And they're more apt to participate in a more extroverted way in a smaller setting, in a less public setting. So I think it applies equally. I think introverts need as many hands-on activities as extroverts. I think that they construct their meaning by doing as well as by thinking. So I try to, I sometimes intentionally use active learning for the introverts to get them to participate in a more overt way. And I found pretty good success with it. Most of our introverts are maybe a little more reticent, but they will participate if it's in that small group. And I don't put the spotlight on them to do any public sharing. Well, we can leave that to the extroverts who enjoy it. That's a good question. Thank you.
On student evaluations, I've gotten both things. That one said, I really love when we do things in groups and stay active, and I've gotten that my peers don't know very much. I get tired of hearing from them, and I want to hear more from somebody who actually knows something.
Which is, yeah, important to remember that you don't want shared ignorance, and that I believe active learning has to be very carefully constructed, and the timing of when you use an active learning project, if it's to introduce something, if it's to cement the learning, if it's a summary activity, yeah, I think you have to be very careful that you've done some teaching so that there is some groundwork, or they have done some reading, and their own personal interpretation is really important, but you need some kind of closure, some kind of summary. But it can't be overdone. Isn't any good thing overdone? No longer a good thing. It becomes too routine and it becomes predictable, and I think a part of an outcome of the brain-based, or excuse me, an outcome of the active learning is brain-based, and that you need to cement those ideas, and I think that we are the experts, and so we need to help them cement correct information, because unlearning misinformation is a very difficult task. We hook all of new learning onto previous learning, and if it's incorrect, then we're really in trouble.
Well, inquiry is sometimes associated with science, but it's not totally with science. In fact, it's in every area. If you talk to a lawyer working on an inquiry brief, or a real estate person trying to get to know a house and the people and how you sell it, we have to go and gather evidence and facts and try to understand more deeply. And what inquiry, when we think of kids, and you were talking about your little ones, they're always asking why, and they're manipulating things, and they're looking at things, and they want to know more, and how it works, and, or as my granddaughter goes, what's it, you know? But somehow along the way, we kind of show them that anyone that asks a question is stupid, you know? And so they get afraid to ask questions, because they might sound stupid. And I think all of us have been in that situation, like, everybody must know this but me. You know, when Jay asked me to talk about this a little bit, I thought, there's an oxymoron, one with being filmed during their inquiry, and two, being an expert on it, because the sheer nature of it says we're always uncovering more, we're finding new ways, and looking at it from different facets. It's too often just oversimplified. Well, you ask a question, you're doing inquiry, but if the question's ours and not theirs, then there's no engagement. And so what we want to do is gradually move them into their own questions and be comfortable with that. Most college classes are taught as a sage on the stage. I mean, you think about it, we are hired as, quote, experts, and we want to didactically deliver what we know. But the reality is, we can't pass on our passion. it has to be caught, and it has to be enjoyed by them. There's a theory that there's no misconceptions out there, that anyone constructing knowledge goes through the same processes as the experts. The experts just stay at it longer. And so if we look at scientific discoveries or whatever, there's a theory that we go through the same stages. And if we do things that stop students from constructing that and building that understanding, then we actually can leave gaps in there, and they don't develop those deeper understandings. One of the things I have up there is if you just cover something, you might as well dig a hole and cover it, because it's not going to be remembered. You know, it's all this, well, I got to cover this, I got to get through it. Well, my favorite analogy for that is I love to take people in the nature trail, because if I make a mistake, nobody's going to remember what I said anyway. You know, because it's just walking right past it. Oh yeah, that's it. Schoen has a really cool way of looking at it, I think, and he talks about the challenge, the dance that occurs with teaching. You know, that constant interaction that goes, that if we give things too soon, it won't be understood, even though we know where we want them to go. But if we wait too long, they won't be interested. And so it's that interplay between teaching and learning that keeps the classroom alive. And Karen talked about that, and David talked about that, and I think we all strive to do that. If we think about, I think my favorite example outside the scientists is how we look at our Bible and theology classes. You know, we can't start them out with a P course. And we can't hand them our faith. They have to be able to be in the intro to the Bible, be immersed in that, look at how it affects other historical and current situations as they move through, and gradually, we hope, have a passion and joy and embeddedness in their own faith. But if we just chew it all up and hand it to it and says, here's what you're supposed to believe, it's not going to withstand in times of trial. And I think that's true of anything we understand, but particularly in that, well, another one is like if you think about our core values, when I was working on the retreat, because nobody argued with the core values. It was like, where'd they come from? We didn't get a chance to construct them and play with them and look at them from different lenses, and this word and that word, and, you know, we like to wordsmith. So we're always, the science writing heuristics looks at claims and evidence. The readers look at main idea and supporting details. The social sciences tend to look at thesis proof things. And it's that idea of actually supporting what we believe with evidence so that we are grounded in it and we own it and it's ours. If we truly understand things, you think about your favorite hobby, and it would be a hard time explaining that to someone. You'd have to do it and construct it and understand it. One of my grad students actually could put 15 strings of lights on a Christmas tree without ever showing any wires. I mean, little known skills, but she understood. The things up there we see of questions waking up the brain. We know we have 18 seconds between when we hear something and it goes in long-term memory, or short-term memory, just short-term memory, excuse me. So one of my favorite examples of that is think about your little toe. Really wants to get out of that shoe, doesn't it? You know, it's like to kick off your shoes and run barefoot. It's getting spring. Reality is we weren't thinking about it before. We have to tune out all kinds of stuff that we're constantly being bombarded with, whether it's students walking by or noises in the background or the lights or the hum of something. We have to tune it out. And so if we're going to get students to tune into their own learning and understanding and dig deeply, then they kind of need to really be able to play with it and really focus on it and stay with it long enough that it gets rehearsed. Myelinization occurs in the brain. Jill talked about the brain research. 90% of the brain researchers are living right now on our watch. If we're not learning from them, I mean, certainly Dewey, Vygotsky, Socrates, you can go way back historical, but the actual people looking at the brain, the Marion Diamonds, who are looking at PET scans and they're looking at how different areas of the brain light up or don't light up, and what wakes up meaning and emotion. those aren't just the, this seems to be a good idea. It's confirming a lot of that seems to be a good idea, but it's actual looking at, it's the stuff Adam Johnson's looking at. It is one of the most cutting edge fields that are out there. And so that whole idea of, I guess my reason I do this, bottom line, is I am disappointed in our society. We tend to be a soundbite society, an advertising society, a political polarization. Everything is dichotomous. There's either global warming or there's not. There's either creation or evolution. We're either in a depression or we're in the recovery. Or, I mean, people don't stop to look at the many facets of it and listen to the other voices and hear the evidence pro and con, because it might disagree with what I believe. And if I like this political candidate, well, then I can't disagree with them, right? Because we're alike. No, God didn't create any of us alike. And so that whole idea of how do we create a literate society? One of the quotes I have up here is, we can't solve the problems of the world the same way we created them. As I tell my students, those of us who are a little older, in college it used to be a big joke. If you don't start conserving water, you're going to be paying $2 a bottle when you get older. Yeah. We are. And we're destroying things. I heard somebody on NPR on the way in talk about the estimate of how much tropical forest, you see me in Ecuador up there, another passion, that's being destroyed. And partly because we don't optimize what we have. We're a trash and throwaway society. And God made us stewards. That's not appropriate. We're stewards of our own minds as well. But that's my soapbox. So what are those key outcomes? What do we put here and say, here's my soapbox, I'm not getting off of it until I've brought you to a deeper understanding of what's here. And that's where I do the longer assessments, those kind of things. The others is good to know, or important to know if we want to have them. That's a quick multiple choice test, and terminology that they need to apply, maybe a process, a skill, quick head check. And then there's the nice to know if we've got time. The kind of tangential. And so what are those key understandings, and how do we look at it from every facet? Wiggins and McTighe talk about that. You know, if we can explain it, if we can show it, if we can demonstrate kind of things. How do we truly get to those deeper understandings? And so that's where inquiry comes from me, because no matter what I'm doing in class, and here's the scary part, everything I've said, everyone here has constructed a different understanding. Based on your own prior experiences, based on where you are in your life, you construct a different, so no matter what we do, I mean, I'm just sitting here babbling on, but you all construct a different understanding. And so that's kind of scary when we look at a class size of 20 or 60 or 100 in a lecture. So that's why I do what I do. Thoughts from you, my sound bites.
Are there disciplines that would argue against active learning and inquiry? I mean, are there, at Bethel, are there courses that are believed to have to be taught through lecture alone?
I think, Jill, I don't know what you, but I think the fear is I won't be able to cover enough if I involve the students. There's X amount of stuff I got to cover, right?
Oh, I agree. I think there are people in disciplines that believe active learning, inquiry learning isn't appropriate, but I think a lot of us would love to sit down with those folks and just brainstorm with them. Why do you feel that way? Why do you believe that to be true? And I'm sure we could find ways for them to incorporate active learning.
I
Even
imagine
large
math
classes.
might be a discipline
Who
that's...
are the students?
Here in Joe?
Did you, what percentage of courses here do you think were mostly just sit and listen to a lecture?
I think, like you said over there, math is probably one. I mean, the only active learning I can think of in any math classes I've taken have been working in groups on problems. But, I mean, you can throw homework in as an active learning thing if you're desperate for it, I suppose. But normally in class, it's just write it on the board, here's an example.
Which in a way is some active learning because you are engaging with the material, which active learning requires us to engage with the material. It doesn't always have to be social. Social is good, but again, not all the time. But there are ways, I think, that our mathematicians could do more. Teach the concepts in a stronger way, with more overt active learning. I think some of our colleagues who teach very large classes, CWC for one, that when they're in the large lecture there could be, but it would take a lot of brainstorming and collaboration to come up with ways that they could incorporate inquiry and active learning. I think it takes a shift in how you view something. Instead of looking at it straight on as the content, you need to look at that information sideways perhaps and wonder how else can I help students interact with the information. I think active learning and inquiry learning take great risks when any of us use them. The students might not be responsive. Maybe I didn't plan well enough because active learning, inquiry learning requires a lot of planning and the gathering of everything up front. And I always run out of time. I have to admit that I underestimate, and I've been doing this for 26 years, I still underestimate how much time an active activity will take, even if it's one I've done 5-6 times. Even yesterday, it took more time than I predicted it would take. But that's okay, because the memory, the attention, the meaning making are all taking place, and usually it converts into long-term memory when you are engaged in producing something instead of just receiving. And again, some of us learn really well through lecture. We love to absorb information. It's a learning style that I think we forget to appreciate. The reading and the listening are important to us, but we need to get them to do something more than just to consume that. But I do think mathematicians, I think large classes also, they feel I can't cover what I need to cover, or I don't have the space. And you need the space to do this type of activity.
I think too, there's that thought, and there is a reality. There's some foundational stuff that needs to be built. They need the vocabulary. It's that second circle leading to that core. So if one of the pictures I have up here is Kent Apostle with his senior research. I mean, you can't have a freshman doing that. So there's certain things you need to understand about, you know, photosynthesis before you're going to ever use the machine and analyze the data and make sense of it. And so the question is, how much of that is necessary? We were talking about our droids, and somebody had a question about something, and they Googled it, and they had the answer right away. You know, oh, can't come up with that term. Oh, here it is. Here's the fact you need. But if you don't know enough to even know kind of where you need to go on that, that's why I talked about it being incremental. Inquiry talks about confirmation inquiry, structured inquiry, guided inquiry, and open inquiry. Confirmation is very cookbook. There's what I want you to know, and here I'm going to make sure I set it up so you see what I want you to see. You'll be hands-on, you'll be active, but very didactic in terms of the conclusion I want you to reach. Structured, we're looking at several facets of the same thing, so you're going to come up with different procedures, different ways of looking at things. Guided, you're coming up with your own question within the same context. And open is more like our capstone projects where we have our seniors doing research. So we have to think again about what the purpose of our instruction is. And actually what type of inquiries. Any active is better than none. Because they'll be texting or doing something else if we don't engage the learner, there's no learning, period. We know that. So, but we can keep it very structured too.
So I'm trying to frame a question here that I think both of you kind of alluded to a little bit. And it has to do with maybe the whole historical paradigm of both our culture and our culture as a whole and our culture as higher education. And that is where the repository of knowledge was largely either in the hands of the priest because we didn't have the text, or then in the hands of the text because we did have the text, or in the case of higher education, in the hands of the expert because they're the experts, whether they've got a PhD or whatever that gives them that. However, the whole paradigm of society has changed. And Patti, you alluded to this a little bit, and you as well, Jill, in the sense that I have at my fingertips a wealth of information that exceeds any textbook I ever looked at in college, way beyond that. So I guess the question would be, how does that paradigm shift of culture, of the where knowledge resides, start changing how we change higher education from being more structure-centric to more learner-centric, I think is kind of the language I'd end up with. Because obviously we're trying to imbue in the students exactly what you're saying, some way to understand how to ask questions and answer questions, somehow to realize that they have to really be involved to change their brain structure to integrate the models. How do we do those types of things in higher education?
Here's my radical response to that is all of us in our PhD programs probably were passive learners where we received information, we consumed it, and most of us, human nature, teach the way we were taught. And until we reprogram our own ways of learning, I think we're going to be stuck, if you will, in that old paradigm. So some of it I really believe, and not to fault us, it's just how it's been historically. That's how we've all been taught, that the sage on the stage is the expert and the repository of information, or will provide me with great works that I should be reading and studying. And we naturally default to, well, I'll teach the way I was taught. And few of us, and Bethel is great at helping us develop more diverse teaching skills. I think we have to be very intentional to learn new ways, so that then our students are, the programmed is the word I want, but that's the wrong word, that our students experience these new ways and then they go out and almost expect to be engaged in the learning instead of passive recipients of information.
I'll just throw in one thought on that, maybe two. I think there's some research on faculty development that shows that faculty really won't change the way that they're going about instruction based on just hearing somebody argue the case, even watching somebody do it. But basically, faculty will truly change their mode of instruction when they've seen themselves having success, with students, through doing something, and that's when that change really will occur, when they see that, hey, my students have gotten a whole lot more out of this course because they've been engaged, versus me just standing and delivering, everything that I knew. So it's actually quite a long process. It certainly starts, with building an intellectual case, for doing something, but it doesn't really solidify until somebody sees it, in their students, and then they say, okay, now I really get this. I'm seeing the point of it.
And I appreciate you saying that, because I was thinking the same thing. And when Bob asked that, because Bob is a master at inquiry, by the way. And one of the things that we notice, if we do something more than straight fact multiple choice test, if we ask them to explain anything, those misconceptions start emerging. Mm-hmm. And they're just, that's where we need to be the one, enough of an expert that we can guide them. I mean, I had one in class yesterday that was arguing that the Galapagos finches were changing in a generation because of some video they'd seen. Well, it made a wonderful learning opportunity. I was a little disappointed. It was after the genetics lecture, so something had been missed along the way. But that whole idea of here's something that is engaging, that they need to know about, they want to know about, that information has come to them in this information technology society, and what do I do with it? Is it reliable? Is it from, what's the source, where it come from? Millions of questions they should be asking. But instead they figure if it's in print, or if we say it, it's right. And so that whole idea of how do we really become good consumers, because I don't think society as a whole is a very good consumer of anything, you know. We don't have good role models out there. We get afraid that somebody might find something that would cause them to question their faith or anything. You know, like God's going to go away because we find out more about His miracles. I don't think so. You know, instead we get deeper and we get more grounded. And but again, what's the good information? There's a whole bunch of flashpoint people out there sending sound bites out, and how do we teach our students to deal with that? If it's only our passions, our knowledge that we're passing on, they're on sand, as the Bible says. There's no rock there.
It seems that you guys are really talking about effectively not changing teachers as much as changing learners. And I find with our doctoral students, it takes that whole first residency for them to get over. They supposed to get a grade, trying to find out what a public intellectual, what's the answer, who is a public intellectual. Instead, we go out and we talk to Dave Stead and Greg Boyd and other people around the community just to get different, well, if they want the answer. We've given you an open-ended question, where do you want to go? And this is a 3-year journey. And and even with doctoral students, you think, well, they're masters plus educators and they should know. But it's really interesting. And having, by the way, experienced being a student of Bob's in his technology class, I will give you, he doesn't give me the answer. He always tells you, he points you in some direction. So anyway, that's.
Well, I guess a comment in response to Bob's question too. My position is that we still treat our students with pedagogy like they're children, pedagogy. And I think we need to move into andragogy. We need to treat them like adult learners. And adult learners come with a whole wealth of experience and access that we didn't have necessarily when we went through the process. And so I think that's the first problem, is all of our methods are directed with pedagogy in mind. So with that being said, there's some interesting research that's been done between American teaching styles and other international teaching styles, specifically in Southeast Asia, Japanese pedagogy. They treat their students very differently, and the teacher, even non-verbally, the teacher never takes a central position in front of the class. They always stand off to the side. The teacher is always encouraging the students to help each other and answer questions together, instead of the teacher being that center point of information. And so I think just the things we do non-verbally, the way we organize our classrooms, most of our classrooms, when I walk into a Bethel classroom, I have to have the students rearrange the classroom so that it is interactive. Instead of all facing forward, we could rearrange our classrooms and make that the norm, and I think it would spark collaboration just because of the physical arrangement. So I think there's some very simple things that we could do that would make the classrooms more andragogical instead of pedagogical.
That's what I like with we've got the smart board and the airliner, and so I teach from the back now, or side or something else, and I'll either hand them the airliner or I'll look something, or they're up at the smart board, so that I agree, just that physical arrangement, rather than looking like I'm supposed to know the right answer and tell them, and they'll get it right on the test and get their A and move through the hoop. And I haven't done them any favor at that point. Yeah, that's really important.
One factor that's changed my teaching is people's ability to stay on task. You know, that when I was first a college teacher, I just got up there and talked, and everybody listened and looked attentive and looked interested. And
The good old days.
Yeah.
You know, and now, what did I read, that the average college student could stay attentive for 12 minutes or something? Was that?
Well, if you think about it, we could stay attentive, you know, even bits of information, we can only hold 7 plus or minus 2. That's why our zip codes and everything like that. But yeah, you look at it's the average length between advertisements on the TV.
Or just look what's happened with sermons, or, you know.
In block scheduling, when it came into secondary schools anyway, they had to reteach all the teachers about every 6 to 7 minutes. You had to change the activity going on in the class, and so you had an hour and a half filled with, movement rather than just longer. I mean,
Well, and the learning cycle is short for all of us, but we're all at different points in our learning cycle. So when we're in a class that's an hour long, you might have 5 who are with you during this time frame and 5 more who are with you in the next 5 minutes. And because we're all cycling up and down with our ability to be attentive. And some of it has to do with motivation, and some of it has to do with society has just crushed us, I think, with so much instant information, and we don't want things to take very long. And we have to go back to enjoying the process. A lot of us are very uncomfortable with unanswered questions in the process, and we have to somehow teach, probably starting with our elementary teachers and our young children, so that when they come to us as young adults, that we're used to enjoying the question, the dirty work of the process, and not having all of that tidy closure. That usually makes us most comfortable, and we have to start to appreciate and value what I believe is the process.
I think we, even at our ages, we're afraid of being wrong. And so when we have a discussion with someone, you're doing that same dance, like, what do you believe? You know, and that whole thing. What if you've looked at things from different angles and come at different conclusions? And so no wonder our students are. You know, it's make a comment on the Tea Party, and then you wonder, oh, wait a minute. Okay, you know, anything we say that is so politically charged, these flashpoints we throw out there all the time, really create polarization. So we want the right answer. It is interesting if you have ever had anyone map attention going on in the classroom, because it's there's a lot of research on it, but it really is about every 7 or 8 minutes. You see them checking in and out. The one we do in science is the 5 E's, so the evaluate's in the middle. And then you have the explore, explain, expand, and yeah, that's it. Let's get to one. Anyway, the point being that formative evaluation has to be constant, and you're just constantly hearing their metacognitive process, so you can have them explain something more, explore something differently, and so it's not a linear, we stand up there and know what we're doing from point A to point B. So that's a little scary too.
We had done a longitudinal study at our school into a block schedule in high school, and we did it over several years, broken down by departments. And we did 2 things. We observed what the teacher was doing and what the level of engagement of students. And we trained people to go in every classroom for twice every period, and then come out. And we charted it over time. We found that because of training and the more variety that the teacher was doing in the skill, the more engaged students were. And frankly, those weren't the same kinds of, and the achievement went up. But there was a variety of things going on. It was student-centered, and learning went up in all areas, including chemistry, math's a different beast, by the way, but that's another day's story. But,
I was one of the observers for that when I was at the district office in Anoka, and it was funny because I went in to observe this math class every 2 minutes, mentioning math. And he was lecturing the whole time, all teacher talk, you know. And toward the end of the period, it was a block period, I came in and the students were working on homework. He said, I'm really sorry, we got done early. Here they were talking about their assignment, they were totally talking about math, but it's that model of, oh, I should be in control.
Well, I think some of what you mentioned, Craig, about achievement went up. To truly utilize active learning, I think you need to push into the higher order thinking skills that Bloom gives to us and many others. And when you're truly doing active learning, you're analyzing, you're applying, you're evaluating, hopefully you're synthesizing, and that would make sense then that achievement would go up when the required thinking skills are beyond what do you know, what do you remember, and retell. So but that's a risk, isn't it? Some of us aren't convinced that it really will benefit the students and that we will see the achievement results, and so we stay with what we're comfortable doing. And so I think those of us who use active learning and inquiry learning should come alongside colleagues who are reticent or who have failed at it and said, see, I told you so, it doesn't work. But when you think about the great discoveries, how many failures came before that great discovery, so that we can help encourage each other to take these risks and that nothing punitive happens when a mistake is made. So just continue to grow and expand our tools.
Jay, you had a comment.
Yeah, we're right about 11 now, so if there are folks that need to leave, that would be fine if people
Thank
want to.
you.
Thank you very much.
No.